celebrate that you guys are still here. A big round of applause, please. Yeah, you're the troopers. Okay, so we're gonna finish off the day with the burnout talk. I'm just briefly introducing me again. What do I do? I'm a life and health coach, and I work also as part of my personal ministry. So I do work with Beautiful Minds, with the referrals that need digital support or virtual support or coaching, because I'm originally in Guatemala. So I worked with Beautiful Minds since 2017. And 2 years ago, the Lord called me back to my country after years, I think 20 years of not living there, to go and expand the line of work of mental health in Guatemala. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counselor. You would say, how can you have influence in that? But in Guatemala, given that it's a developing country, we need to do a lot of work just building awareness and raising awareness. So the Lord provided with a ministry that's called Be Healthy Living. And the idea with that ministry is to reach people through education. So given that I have a background in the corporate world, I work with global companies in the region with bringing corporate wellness. So we bring the health message into the companies, and I get to coach high executives that struggle with burnout, especially because I have a personal story on that line, through holistic and natural approaches. I also work with Dr. Bainas and the team at Beautiful Minds California with the digital platform. So this program that's going to be launched, the Overcoming program, I'm going to be one of the facilitators and one of the coaches. We worked on it together, and I also work with people that are outside of the California geography that need coaching virtually. So if you're interested, or if you know someone that can benefit from coaching, I do have some personal cards, and we can definitely schedule a discovery call, which is something I give for free for people to try out coaching, given that coaching sometimes people don't really know what it is or how it works in combination with therapy. So yeah, that's what I do. And one of my biggest burdens is to reach the corporate executives, because how do we get to them as a church? It's really hard, right? But having lived 15 years of my life in companies, Fortune 500 companies. I worked for Novartis, which is one of the biggest pharmaceuticals. I worked with Colgate-Palmolive, the toothpaste company, along with other companies, but I pretty much lived in different parts of the world working as an expat for these companies. Very successful, you would say, in the world, but I was really, really broken. All that led me to find the Lord in that brokenness, to find a renewed purpose, which is to really do this for a living, full-time, working for Him, in sharing the hope of our message in the lens of mental. And I learned through my own experience that a body cannot be healthy unless the mind is. Why? Because in our minds is where we first understand that we have a need. This is where we make decisions. This is where we connect with the Lord and get the fruits of the Spirit, right? Which is willpower and discipline and discernment, right? But if the brain is sick, how can we really reach people? So yeah, we have a fantastic health message, right? We have the perfect diet that we know that works. We know that exercise and sleep. But we may have all this beautiful packaged concept, but if people are not choosing to live by that, how successful can we be? So we must address the mind. We must address the brain to get people interested, to get people to apply what they're learning, and to get them motivated along the journey. So what is burnout? How many of you have experienced personally burnout or suspect? I'm glad that you're all here, because me too. So can some of you share what is burnout for you? How does that look like?
Not having joy in what you're doing, like lack of joy, no motivation, you're just doing it.
Lack of joy and motivation, yes.
Putting all your energies into one area to the neglect of everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, feeling like we're a balance, right? Like burning one wheel, and other things are burning, yes?
I feel like a hamster wheel, like you're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over, and there's never an end, and there's never a
say that when you thresh or on water? Treading water. Yes, thank you. It's like treading water, right? Like we do this and we make no progress, and then it starts to break up. Yeah. Anybody else that like to share what burnout feels like?
Too many responsibilities.
Too much.
Too much.
Yeah. And then things start falling off. Absolutely. This is how I define burnout, right? We're forced to stop. We're not even functional anymore. Everything's falling off. And I like to see health like we are all beautifully, wonderfully created and designed, engineered cars. And these cars have 4 tires. And every tire is a dimension of our health, right? So we have the physical tire, which is how we look and how we feel. We have the mental, which is how we learn, how we retain, how we apply and process the world around us mentally. We have the emotional tire, which is our connection, our feelings, how we connect with ourselves and how we connect with others. And then we have the spiritual component, which is what do I identify with? Where do I derive value and purpose and meaning? This is where our identity comes from, right? But if one of these tires is broken or flat, what's the car's situation? Are we gonna get far?
Paralysis.
Paralysis, the car won't move, one tire. And in burnout, that's exactly what happens. One tire starts falling, getting flat, the other one is affected, and the other one's too, to the point of no progress, right? So burnout is actually the car not being able to move. And it's amazing, but in my personal experience, in my journey with burnout, I started feeling it physically. I started having a lot of physical problems, mostly gastric. And then my hormones were all upside down. I was not sleeping well. It was just physically, I was a mess. And that led me to disconnect from the people around me. I remember I would stand up in big talks like these. With the corporate world, you have a lot of pressure, especially when you're an expat and you work in the headquarters of the company, right? And I couldn't even finish my sentences because I was like, couldn't talk. That's when I was like, I cannot continue my career. I have to stop and quit because I was completely disabled because of my body not being able to function. My mind, my relationships, and spiritually, I did not even believe there was hope. I totally lost hope. But yeah, the Lord found me in that. I had to stop so that I could find Him. Otherwise, I wouldn't have stopped. So I see that as a blessing. Burnout is an officially diagnosable condition. We talk about burnout like, oh, you know, you're stressed. But actually, it is a mental health condition. It has been now considered by the World Health Organization as a classified disease of mental illness, effective in 2022, not too far ago. And this is why I was like, Lord, maybe you called me back to Guatemala and really serve in this capacity, because corporations are needing this more than ever, especially now that it's been diagnosed, right? This term actually started in 1974 by a psychologist that defined burnout as the consequences of severe stress in those that would be in healthcare professions. But I believe that burnout is actually a term that applies not only in the medical platforms or in the corporate, but actually everywhere we are, right? Like a mother. It's amazing how in our church we are called to be set apart. We can no longer take our kids to school. We need to homeschool them because the system is not really supporting the values we stand for, right? So you see mothers that are homeschooling our diet. We cannot even go and eat out. We cannot go and buy stuff in the supermarket as we used to before because it's really making us sick. So what are the options for us to cook from scratch and do it ourselves? That's extra labor. What about keeping our spirituality in the midst of this totally consumed world of social and digital media? We're competing with screens. I think there's nothing harder than the parents today dealing with how do you protect your children from the screens and all these temptations out there. I mean, that's in addition to the normal role of a mother and a father. I mean, we do have a lot of stress put on ourselves because of the world we live in, right? Plus, we're called to serve. So we are all caregivers, right? We are called to serve. We're all part of our church ministries and we, in our work and in our own lives, we seek to live up our Christianity. So all that added up can lead to burnout. So no one is exempt. You don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be a nurse. You just have to be Seventh-day Adventist in this world, right? We are faced with this. So hey, what do we do about it? God doesn't put us in a situation without giving us the strategy, right? So I just want to highlight that burnout actually was defined in 1974. This was not too far out. Same with emotional intelligence, right? These are terms that are quite recent, and therefore we must be at the front lines of how to deal with it. Although burnout is getting more attention, as we previously mentioned in 2022, it was already officialized to be a mental health condition or a syndrome. It's actually really hard to spot because we're all struggling with the same need of the same resource, which is what's the biggest resource and the most valuable resource we have? Time. We're all in the search of how do we make more efficient use of our time and where do we buy time? I mean, I've looked for time in Walmart, in Amazon, cannot find it. So how do we create it? We all have the same 24 hours and we need to be more strategic, right? In how to use our time, but not at the cost of our health. So a lot of the things that I work with my clients is this formula that is capacity versus demands, right? So life is very demanding, but there's another part of the equation, which is how do I increase my capacity so that whatever demands I have, I'm going to be capable of navigating them, yeah? So this is the balance that we're looking for, but definitely really hard to find it because we are doing, although we're doing everything right, we're very depleted. So it's hard to spot, not only because we don't know how it looks like, but we don't really know that actually we shouldn't be living like this, right? It seems to be the MO. So what is burnout? It's a syndrome conceptualized resulting in chronic workplace stress that is not successfully managed. Bless you. So it's chronic stress, but there's a key component in this definition, which is successfully managed, right? It's not successfully managed. So stress is going to be there. The key is how do we manage it? How do we increase our capacity so that we become better strategists with the use of time? Just a little of context of the burnout costs. Before COVID, it was around 43% of the people identifying with burnout. After COVID, it became even more than half, 60%. It's growing rapidly, especially after COVID. There was an added layer of stress. And I see this even in the airports. You know, when I was flying here, I was like, wow, isn't it funny how we are still going through these checkpoints and we're not allowed to carry water? And where did this come from? Like from 9/11, and we haven't lifted these restrictions. And then we had all these additional restrictions with COVID and the vaccine. And I'm thinking, wow, of course we're burning out. We're having new complexity in the way we're living, and more restrictions. And it is written. We know that this is where we're headed, right? It's going to be harder. There's a multi-billionaire healthcare costs with burnout. A lot of people are really struggling. It's the #1 disability in the workplace. It's one of the biggest reasons why people have turnover in the workplace. So a lot of people cannot handle it, and then they leave, and it just poses a lot of stress. It represents around 34% of the annual salary, the fact that the employees are disengaged. So this is why companies are looking into how do we create a space where we can prevent people from burning out. It's also, 20 to 50% of the employee turnover is due to burnout, and it can take up to years to recover, and I can attest that. Burnout is not something that we take vacations and we're fine with after. It takes years to recover. So with even more reason, it's important to identify it early and then take preventive measures so that we don't end up in the place of complete discapacity. So how do I know if I have burnout? So these are some of the screening tools. I would encourage you to look them up. I have one in Spanish. This is why I did not bring it, but you can look up these ones in English online. The Maslach and the Copenhagen, those are inventories that you just quickly answer, and it will give you the level of risk if you suspect you may be in burnout. or at the point of burnout. So it's just important to know where we are and to know that there are tools we can refer to others. What are the most common ways of coping with burnout? These are some of the things that I've seen. The number one competitor at Beautiful Minds is yoga. It's a multi-billionaire industry. People are looking for yoga as a resource for mental health. But what we know about yoga is that rather than strengthening our frontal lobe, it actually shuts it down. There's a lot of science that shows us that this kind of meditation of emptying your brain is not the most efficient for our brain health. And yeah, there's a sense of community, it's exercise, it's packaged very well, but the root behind the yoga is very dangerous. And we're called not to entertain these concepts, but what do we offer, right? That's the counterfeit. What do we offer as a church? We're going to talk about that. The other one that I've seen is people just self-medicate. You know? I remember when I was burnt out, I would just go out with my friends and be like, play hard and work hard. That was my dilemma. That was how I would live. And what happens in the long term? The body does not sustain that pace. Also going to food, especially sugar and coffee. Why in the case of burnout? Because we're so depleted on energy that we want to get some type of push, and sugar does this to us. It gives us that peak of energy. Coffee does that too. Also, well, the coffee there. Also exercise. We feel like, oh, you know, I'm tired, I'm gonna exercise, and you go and do all these like extreme sports or extreme exercises, and actually that depletes your body more, but it gives you that sense of energy because of the endorphins, right? So for burnout people, the best exercise is the calm one, like Pilates, going for a walk, stretches, very, you know, low intensive exercise is what the body needs. Also, we take medication, right? We feel like, oh, you know, I'm stressed, so I'm just gonna take a pill. If my body aches, I'm just gonna take care of the pain at the moment. I remember I was taking some anxiety medication, but I could totally see how my brain was not responding effectively. So I was calmer, but I was not being the same creative and at the moment driven, a curious person. My job, it was affecting me significantly, and I was like, I cannot take these pills because when they ask a question, I'm not even sure if I know the answer. It was heavy, I remember. And then in terms of the escape, right, we tend to go to look for pauses. How do I take a time out? How do I disconnect from everyday stresses? So what do? What's in our pocket? We just self-medicate and disconnect. So yes, we need a timeout, but no, not in things that will drive us deeper into the state of burnout. So what are usually the causes of burnout? Well, high workload, we talked about that. Feeling that we have a low value. A lot of times we're working because we get our sense of value from our work and our accomplishments. That was me. I was lacking my identity in Christ, and my identity was in my titles, in my work positions, right? Lack of control. So sometimes we seek to have more control, and we, instead of delegating and trusting that the Lord will take care of other things, we want to do it all for ourselves. Low decision making, that also leads to frustration and burnout when we're not empowered in our jobs, when we have no or very limited support, and the lack of rewards, when we're not recognized for our values. So we keep, you know, performing, but we feel very discouraged because we don't see a motivation. So what are the three major signs of burnout? The first one is exhaustion. When we feel fatigued, when it's hard for us to do normal daily tasks. The second one is depersonalization. This is where we disconnect from the world around us. I no longer care if you're happy or not. I no longer care if what I said bothered you or not. I no longer care if you show up or not. When we no longer care is because we don't have the capacity, right? We're very low on fuel emotionally and physically. And then the third one is when we have reduced personal accomplishments, when we do a lot, but yet we're not effective. This is what my sister here was sharing, right? Treading on water, and I'm not being efficient. So there are different stages. We must stay aware of the different stages of burnout. So especially when we start feeling that our fuel or our energy is running low is when we must stop and say what's going on. This is where you reach out for support. Yeah, you speak up, you get a coach, you get a support group, you strategize differently how you're doing life, right? But we must stop and take a look at what's working and what can be done differently. And then when we start going into the chronic symptoms, these are some of the examples that I just shared, right? And we're going to look into a little bit more of what that is. But that's pretty much how our body is reflecting that we are needing help or to stop. Then we go into, crisis, and then we want to avoid hitting the wall. We don't want to go into that spot, right? So it's good to start with the light yellow, the light green, and the yellow. This is where the best time to take action is. So let's not wait for it's too late, because the recovery will take a lot longer. So let's look at this from a physiological level. We are all wired to respond to stress, right? We have a nervous system. But when this nervous system is dysregulated, it's supposed to be dysregulated only in short periods of time. Why? Because we must take action towards something that may be threatening us, right? Stress, what is stress? When we feel threatened, when we feel like we must act out of our normal way of living. So this is usually when we go into our fight or flight mode. Have you heard of this concept, flight or fight? Yeah, so we're built like this, God built us like this, so that if we see something that threatens us, we can then either fight it for survival or run from it. It's for our survival, yeah? There's another concept, which is freeze, when we cannot even fight or flight, but we stay stable in that state of alert for too long. That's what's considered chronic stress. And then we have the other side, which is, okay, I decided to fight or fly, but then I go back to my safe mode. And this is called the rest and digest. This is where we all should be operating from. But many times we're here. We're in the freeze or in the fight and flight constantly, right? We're either activating this sense of alert way too much, dysregulating our system, or we're just living in that state. And this is what causes the inflammation, and eventually we burn out. In this state, we feel anxious, everything feels urgent, we wake up stressed, we cannot sleep well, we cannot focus, we have panic attacks, and it feels like we can never do enough. This is where the red flag comes up and says, okay, let's take a look at this, and how can we change the direction so that we can move back into our safe mode, which is our goal. We're going to focus on these two stages and the main contributing factors of these, and how we can redirect strategies to go back to that goal of the rest and digest. So the first one, and my very favorite one, this really changed my life personally when I learned about burnout and my own condition, is stress. Is stress, let me go back, is stress a negative or a positive thing? Who would say it's a negative thing? I want to see who. Yeah, well, you've probably heard Dr. Minas and Amanda this weekend, haven't you? Yeah, usually when we think of stress, all the hands go up when I ask if it's negative. Yeah, when we use the word I'm stressed, it's a negative thing. I'm not saying, oh, I'm stressed because I'm doing my gym, right? But we're actually stressing our bodies when we're doing the gym, yeah? But the perception of stress is even more harmful than stress itself. Let me say that again. The perception of stress is even more harmful than the stress itself. So there's a study that they did, and they asked a group of people like you, so we can do the study here too, how much stress did you experience in the last year? So relative little stress, let me see a show of hands. In the last year, 1, 2, okay. What about moderate amounts of stress? 1, 2, 3, yeah. What about a lot of stress? Almost all of the group, a big part of the group. Yeah, so we live in a very stressful society, yes, and I'm glad that we're talking about these topics, because how do we deal with it is what we want, yeah? So what they tracked in this study was 30,000 adults for 8 years, and they asked them, how much stress did you experience? So those that had experienced a lot of stress, so that would mean the third one, the third question, or the third group, they had a 43 risk of dying. Almost half of them increased the risk of death. but only true for those who believed that stress was harmful. So those that perceived it negatively, almost half of the group increased their risk of death. Those who experienced a lot of stress, same answer, but did not see it as harmful, had the lowest risk of dying, including those that reported very little stress. So those that said, I'm not stressed, or I haven't been stressed, or I have had very little, with those that said, I had a lot, but looked at stress as positive, had the same. They were the same. Does that make sense? Yeah? So researchers estimated that over 8 years, they were tracking deaths. They calculated how many people would die prematurely just by perceiving stress negatively. It's amazing. It said if the estimate is correct, that would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in US. Just believing that stress is bad. Killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide. Can you imagine? Just by believing stress is negative. So seeing stress as negative can harm us even more than the stress itself. But what have we learned this weekend? What tools have we learned? Amanda gave us one, very powerful. Yeah, how do we reframe stress? Right? How can we look at stress instead of it being a threat as an opportunity for us to grow, right? So our perception of stress is one of the key components to shift from being in this alert mode and chronic fatigue to being into more proactive and actually generating more energy. You know that energy can be created a lot more than what it can be stored, and all of that can be done by just the way we're looking at the situation, so we can reframe the situation, and instead of it seeing it like, oh, this is terrible, it's like, oh, this is my opportunity to grow this part of my life. Sounds easy, better said than done. Remember I talked about how many thoughts we have every day and how many of these are negative, so this is just a constant exercise and a workout that we have until the rest of our lives. I think this is a daily work. What strategies can we do in terms of changing our perception? Definitely CBT, we talked about reframing. Another one is really identifying first what stresses me, and then how do I create boundaries? Like which ones of these are serving me in this stage of my life, and which ones can be put on the back burner for now. We're all living through different stages and phases. There's times where our energy is low, so then if our capacity is low, we cannot take on too much. We cannot compare ourselves with when we were the most effective teenagers, when we're in our aging process, right? So we need to constantly modify the list of what we are committing to based on what our capacity is, and remember to say no to a lot of the things that are limiting us to say yes to what matters to me. So when we talk about boundaries and we talk about saying no, many times we feel like, oh, this is negative, but it's actually, there's another side of the coin. What are we saying yes to by saying no? That empowers us to say, I'm going to be true to what matters to me. There's a great book called Boundaries that you can look up also if you want to read it. It's written by a Christian author and gives a lot of good tips on how to practice boundaries. Increasing stress tolerance, so definitely identifying what fuels my car. Remember, we're all different cars, and we're all built differently to reach different destinations. What gives you fuel to reach your destination? That's a part of getting to know ourselves. The Lord has given us a love for what we have a love to, and I'm talking about the good stuff, not the thing that harms us. Because He has a purpose for us in that line. It's not a coincidence that we like to do certain things, or that we're inclined to do certain others. But He's actually built us up so that through following that, we can find our purpose and He can use us in our full capacity. But we're not all called to do the same things. Remember, there's big cars, there's small cars, there's luxury cars, right? What type of car are you, and where are you headed? And then, based on that, what kind of environment you need to create? What kind of roads? What kind of food you're going to give that car, right? And how often? There's cars that need to be fueled more regularly than others. So getting to know ourselves in the process of our journey will help us know what to say yes and what to say no to, and what our limitations are. But how do we know? By being out there and doing life, right? But taking time to reflect on that is why I value coaching so much. Meeting with someone every week, and this is why yesterday when someone asked about do everybody need to see a mental professional, Amanda and Dr. Vainas were more inclined in saying no, not everybody. I was more inclined in saying yes, we do. But I come from a place of the coaching piece. I come from a place of we need to keep our psyche in check. We need to have a space so that we can do our mental health exercises, and how better than to do that with someone that can support you. Yeah? So that will help us. The second one, there is another cause of burnout. So one is perceived stress, and how are we looking at life, and how are we choosing, right, to engage. The second one is physiological. Is our body inflamed? And our brains also get inflamed. When we're inflamed, our bodies don't work out the same way. So it's like the chicken or the hen, right? But yes, we must also make sure that our bodies are living in an environment that we're not running on our wheels, but actually in a pavement where we can make good traction. And what is that? Our nutrition. This is our medicine. So inflammation can happen throughout the body. It's the chronic form that we want to be mindful for, not to be chronically inflamed. So physical stressors are usually not even thought about as a cause of stress and dysfunction and burnout, but they are actually major causes of our symptoms. So what stresses us physically? A lot of it is the food, right? Have you noticed how much sensitivity we have now with food? The big aisle of gluten-free is growing more and more, right? And all these different FODMAP diets and all these different diets that are coming out. I wonder why we didn't have that 20 years ago. But it's because our food is highly contaminated and our bodies are not used to that. So we're being inflamed by just what we're eating. So I would recommend us all, yes, to go as clean as possible, but also be mindful. Even if we don't deal with stress or burnout, to be mindful not to get to that point by helping our bodies prevent the inflammation. So there's a lot of gut microbiome imbalance, the famous connection of gut-mind, gut-brain, yeah? So if our guts are not healthy, our brains will not be. So many times we can be experiencing just mental distress because we're not giving our bodies the nutrients that we need, or we're not absorbing them. So let's work on it holistically. Also, dieting or long-term under-eating. When we're burnt out, we burn fuel a lot more faster. So eating, and many people say, no, I shouldn't be eating because it's not good, the 2-meal day and the 2-meal is the way to go. You know what? If you're burning a lot, your body needs it. So let's understand where we are in the journey and identify what's driving us to eat, right? If it's coping or if it's the energy that we need, and perhaps modify our meals so that we can have more nutrients. Too much aerobic exercise can also inflame the body, right? Many times we think, oh, I'm exercising, I'm doing the best, but our bodies cannot tolerate a lot more taxing than what we're already giving them. So identifying what's the right type of exercise is important. Staying away from processed and high sugar foods. I'm going to talk a little bit about what sugar does to us and how it affects us, especially when we're in this state. Let's try to cut carbs and making sure we prioritize our sleep. This is what restores our bodies. And you know, people that suffer from burnout are typically the type A personalities, the driven, the CEOs, the ones that have big responsibilities. And they say, nah, I'll work, I'll sleep when I die. There's no time, time is money, you know? And you work. I remember one of the biggest things when I became an Adventist as a result of burnout and recovering my health, because I got into the church through the health message, and this is why I strongly believe in it, and I live for it in my work, was the Sabbath. I'm like, no, you cannot take the Sabbath. This is productivity for me. I cannot do it. But I trusted the Lord, and I understood how my body was built, and oh my goodness, was I more efficient, right? So understanding our bodies can help us know how to put the environment that will make them flourish. Okay, strategies for this one: balanced nutrition. The brain needs 20 to 40% of the nutrients just to function. So yes, we must eat. Fasting for me, being a burnout state, was not ideal for me. And sometimes we think of fasting and being the best remedies, but you know, we are all different and we need to know what works for us in the stage where we are. Cannot emphasize that enough. Vitamin and mineral support. A lot of the soil today is depleted and we're not getting enough minerals, especially if we're plant-based eaters. Make sure you get checked with your vitamin Ds, your vitamins Bs, making sure that we have that source of energy, because when we're low and depleted in some of these, we have fatigue. So a lot of times we think it's our life, but it's actually physiologically that we're lacking certain minerals. Some holistic techniques that get the body back into balance, like making sure, I remember I scheduled a massage every week in my recovery. Every week, that was like where I would invest. That was my medicine, massage. Going to sauna, hydrotherapies. When you're burnt out and stressed, usually very anxious people also, anxiety lead to burnout. The hydrotherapy that is cold and hot might not be the best. Let's take the word might, it's not the best. So doing more neutral temperature baths can be very helpful to regulate the nervous system. We're talking about a very high hyperactive nervous system, so what can we do to lower it down? So holistic techniques can help with that, like classical music, meditation in God's words, and filling our minds with good concepts that are uplifting. Identify and remove any food sensitivity. Let's support our hormones, especially ladies. We get to have these highs and lows, you know, because hormonally we're all built very complex like that, but making sure we keep track of that can also help us. Restorative exercise and sleep hygiene. The number 3 is the blood sugar imbalances, and I wanted to emphasize this one because when we are low in energy, we tend to oversugar, right? So it is important to look at this one. Usually it is overlooked unless it's related to diabetes or some type of heart condition. But when we talk about mental health, sugar plays a big role. And it's very linked to COS2, which is our inflammation precursors, right? So unbalanced sugar levels can trigger our insulin. It impacts our insulin, and what happens? We start feeling hungry. Have you felt that? Like, oh, I'm stressed, I'm gonna go and eat because I'm stressed? There's a connection in our nervous system that leads us to food when we're stressed. And this is where we call the nervous eating, right? And then we feel all guilty, and then we don't know what to do, and we go into this vicious cycle, right? It's kind of where the devil wants us. He wants us to feel negatively and then to act negatively. Like the triangle that Amanda was showing. So I feel guilty, I go and eat the cake. I eat the cake and I feel shameful, and I feel shameful and I go and have the burger now. And now I have the cake and the burger, and now I'm gonna isolate them. Tiki to the point that the spiral goes all the way down, and then we start doubting God. God, do you really exist? Why aren't you helping me with this? Why aren't you being my savior in this? Isn't it funny? We get to that point. We're like, no, this is crazy. I just cannot have control. I don't believe in this fruit of the spirit of self-control because I cannot practice it. But there is a component that sets us free, right? Which is the truth and what we've been learning, but really changing the way we're looking at things and how we're choosing to do things differently. So sugar can really give us these highs and this sense of hunger, but the body needs it. So how do we replace that with good nutrients, with eating a balanced diet? Unbalanced nutrition can lead to blood sugar irregularities. So many times it's not the lack of sugar, it's just that we're not being nourished well. So what can we do? I have a little plate here if you can see it. So, I mean, we can have tons of hours of talks about what to eat and how to eat it, and we're plant-based, and what these ingredients are good for, and so forth. I like to summarize it in eating the rainbow and no labels, like no codes. How do you call these? Like the shopping codes, the labels in our food. So half of your plate, make it either just fruits or just vegetables, raw if you can. It's better because you have a lot more enzymes to digest. And then 30% of your plate, which is the second biggest group, is carbohydrates, and I'm talking about the complex ones. You know, there's a lot of people having keto diets and taking the carbs out because there's bad reputation on carbs, but actually your brain needs the sugar, needs the glucose, but it's converted from the carbohydrates. So yes, we should eat carbs because that's the #1 fuel for the brain, but it should be the complex carbs, not the refined cakes. but the potatoes, the whole wheat rice, and what we know to be good carbs. That should be the most important nutrient in our diets, and then followed by protein and the good fats. So let's not neglect eating, thinking fasting or not eating will help us. No, we must eat because we're burning a lot. What we need to eat is well, yeah? We need to improve the quality of the foods we're eating in every meal, right? Balance macronutrients and focus on healthy protein, fats, and fiber. Fiber is important, we know this, we're plant-based promoters. And also making sure we have good supplementation. So here are some of the vitamins that Dr. Pinos recommends, like the vitamin, and that was a question yesterday, the B complex, vitamin 1 and 5 and 12, I would add there. Omega-3s, preferably plant-based. Magnesium is so important for so many things of our bodies. This one should be a must in our diets. Vitamin C, zinc, and amino acids. So yeah, we must have our balanced diet so that we don't tend to go to the sugars. And the last one, which is the sleep. For burnout, this is super important, the sleep. And why? Because when we're stressed, we release a hormone called cortisol. And the cortisol is what doesn't let us sleep when it's too high. So what we need is not only to regulate the stress, but also to find a way that the cortisol functions when we need it and not when we need to go to sleep. So these are 4 different cycles here that you can see. And what we want to say is that disruption happens when we're exposed to the light at the wrong time. So we talked about the screens, right? How important it is for us to protect our internal clocks. So one of the main components that can help us with sleep is reduce the screen. I remember that was the way that I would pacify, my pacifier as I go to bed. I don't know if you guys have the same thing, but I need to take my head off of all the daily work. So I'm gonna plug in my phone and catch up with my friends. And even though I would be like, no, I'm not in social media, I'm connecting with my chat rooms and sending emails, it's still screen light. So let's try to schedule that in some other time of the day, but not close to bedtime. Also TV or any other computer light, or you can buy those beautiful glasses that are, now they're making them very fashionable. They're not that bad looking. And you can expose to these lights so that you're not altering your system. Also not eating late or close to bedtime, at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime, and it should be a very light meal so that your insulin is not released and then your melatonin is not hindered by that. So that can help you sleep better. But what I'm giving you the strategies before presenting the problem. And here I just want to highlight that the cortisol levels are in these different graphs. The top left, you can see cortisol too high in the morning and peaking too early. The other one is when the cortisol is high all day. This is when we're like running in our wheels, and this is what leads to burnout. So what we want is the first one, to have good cortisol in the morning, to be effective, and then regulate the rest of the day. But we also have when we don't sleep well, because we're wired and tired, is when the cortisol starts to kick in after midday and stays up all the way to the evening. And there's a case here where we are completely depleted of cortisol. So the top one is what leads to burnout, but once we're burned out, we don't even have the energy. So what we really need to be mindful is, how are we using this hormone by the choices and the environment of our day? So follow nature, yeah, the screens, removing that, removing the heavy meals close to bedtime, reducing energy drinks, or if you eat or drink caffeinated products, make sure you eat and drink these before the midday. Before 11 should be the last one, and it should be only one at the most, if you don't want this to interfere with your system. Coffee takes around 24 hours to 48 to get out of your system. Just 1 cup of coffee, so it's important not to drink it, or to drink it in moderation before the first half of the day. Outside, the sun really helps us, we know this, but when you go to the beach and you get burnt in your skin, like nice suntan, don't you sleep very well? Yeah, so what can we do to help and leverage if we have access to the sun to sleep better? And definitely the morning exercise can help us regulate our hormonal system, but also helps us set up our systems to be tired and go to bed early so that we can have this good habit of exercising every morning. That's a good motivation. So those would be some strategies. We do have a sleep hygiene sheet. I'm going to put a QR code. If you want some of these handouts, I'd be happy to send them to you. If you want some additional tools to get you back on track on your lifestyle in these areas. But what we want to do here, and sorry the bottom is in Spanish, but what I want to really emphasize here is what we want to address is the environment. There's no cure for one problem, right? Burnout can only be addressed when we look at it holistically. So what we want is to change the environment and to become advocates of change in our society so that we can help one another, not to carry the burden on ourselves, but actually as a whole team. So burnout is reversible, but action is needed before it becomes chronic. So what do we need to do? Acknowledge it. So let's get screened if you have suspicion that you may be struggling with burnout. Identify what may be causing this, right? What are your demands versus your capacity, and how can we address that through an action plan? And let's start now. Start small. Think of one thing of what we learned today. One thing. Whatever caught your attention. If it was the sleep, or if it was the inflammation, or if it was the sugar, pick one thing. And let's bring it home with an action step. So consistency is a lot better than intensity. If we work on one area, we will increase our capacity so that we can work in another area and continue building our way up. So, but what's the secret? How do we eat an apple? We break it in small pieces, one bite at a time. Just one thing you can do today. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest, yeah, and what follows. So with Dr. Bainas, we took the Choose Life acronym that the Lord gave us for our approach to mental health wellness. And I asked him, Dr. Bainas, how can we bring the Choose Life acronym for people to have it practical? Like, how can you practically apply? There's so many layers to each letter, right? So we came up with this list called Taking Care of Me Daily Tracker. And it's a list of 7 days, and you can just have one every week. And you can just click or check each box of the things that you are doing or things that you can start adding. So when I talk about choosing one thing, let's look at this list and work on one thing this week. And then we can add another one. Probably you already do some of these. But this is very helpful because he said, if I were to give a prescription of lifestyle for optimal mental health, this is what I would encourage. So the first piece in this part, the wellness habits, you will have what he's prescribing. So for example, here he says early to bed, early to rise. And then it says sleep time and wake time, and then it gives you an example of how to fill the sheet out. But there's things like, for example, let me think of one that you may not be familiarized with, like screen time says here. So he would say, you know, whatever goal you want, like reduce 1 hour daily. And then if you do it, you just put a check mark and you keep track of how it went the week. This sheet will not only help you with some ideas on how to apply the Choose Life acronym, but will also help you know what are you doing or what things can you add in your day that can help you. And it also, especially for the sleep one, it helps you track and say, oh my goodness, I'm going to bed very late. How can I make things better? And then you look at other parts of the list and you can be like, oh, I'm going to add classical music. But behind every recommendation that he's giving here, there's science that proves that it will be effective for your brain. So if you have any questions on this, you can text me, but I would like to make this available for you all. If you just click here and let me know what email I can send this to, and I'll send you the tools you need, which include the Taking Care of Me sheet, a copy of the presentations, and also the sleep hygiene is not there, but if you sign up, I'll just send it as a bonus, as an extra. Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Should we pray as we close?
Yeah, that would be great, yes.
Okay, Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this mental health summit. I thank you for each one of the people that are here and their families, and I just ask you, Lord, that what we learned this weekend could be of
practical application so that we remember it week after week, Lord, as we continue to live according to your model and we continue to be light bearers of your hope and your message in this community. I ask for a special blessing on this church and the ministries represented by each person. And I just ask you, Lord, to continue giving us your spirit as we prepare for your soon return. Lord, may we be healthy, strong, and ready spiritually as well, Father. So I thank you for being with us all along, and we put our lives in your hands. We love you, and we ask these